this very special evening, it is my great privilege to introduce Amanda Block, whose debut novel, The Lost Storyteller, was published by Hodder Studio earlier this month. Now, after our conversation, there'll be time for a short Q&A at the end. So please do put any questions into the chat function, and we'll do our best to tackle those later on. Now, Amanda's powerful tale of a daughter's quest to find her disappeared father is a compelling read. And you don't have to take my word for it, because it's Book of the Month at Waterstones in Ilford, and they say, this beautiful book celebrates the magic of storytelling, the bonds of family, and a mystery all wrapped into one. Totally engaging and heartwarming. You must pick up this book. Now, reviewers are united in the opinion that this is a cracking debut novel, and it's available from all good bookshops, including Greaves here in Berwick, and also as an ebook and audiobook. Amanda, huge congratulations on publication of your first novel.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for making time for us tonight. I mean, I guess it actually is a pretty exciting and very busy time for you.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a few weeks. So it came out on the 8th of July, so just over 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I feel that I'm only just sort of catching my breath from all the excitement that kind of surrounded the launch. So this is lovely, actually. I wouldn't say the excitement's died down, but things are a little bit quieter. So this is another kind of little boost in the general excitement of the launch.
Now, I'm sure some of our guests here have read your novel, but others will still have that pleasure to come. So I wondered if you could give us a sort of no spoiler plot summary of The Lost Storyteller.
Yeah, I mean, you did a great introduction there. That was brilliant. So yeah, it is about a young woman's quest to find her father. The central character is called Rebecca. She hasn't seen her father Leo since she was a young child, and she's a little bit of a prickly character, a little bit chilly. So she's sort of decided to forget him. Decided that it doesn't matter that she hasn't seen him for so long, and he's not part of her life. But Leo, her father was a children's TV star in the 90s, and one day a journalist shows up at Rebecca's office because he wants to include Leo in an article about 90s children's TV. And this encounter gets Rebecca kind of thinking about her father again, slightly reluctantly. And then she receives a book of fairy tales that were written by Leo, her father, and dedicated to her. And that is another hook. And this starts her on this quest to kind of find out where her father went, what happened to him, if he's still alive. And over the course of this sort of journey that she goes on, she starts to realize that the fairy tales that he wrote are potentially more truthful than the things that she's hearing elsewhere from other people.
Yes, I mean, in Rebecca's defense, her close family, her mum and her grandma are pretty uncommunicative about her lost dad as well. So they have certainly helped erase a desire perhaps to know him. Well, I think we'll come back to your intriguing story in a while, but let's talk a little bit about your route into writing. I mean, I know you've published short fiction and have other writing outlets, but is being a novelist what you always wanted to do?
Yeah, it was, which is another reason why the last few weeks have just been completely mind-blowing. And I don't think it's really sunk in actually that I've achieved my life's dream. Like, wow. But yeah, I have since I was about 13 years old, reading Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. I remember reading that book and thinking, I want to do this. I want to sort of, create these amazing stories, and I think the feeling that I had reading that book, I wanted to inspire in other people. So yeah, it's been a dream that I've had since I was a young teenager. But it's taken me a little while to get here. It's been a sort of rather long road. And yeah, so I started, where do I begin, really? I did English literature at uni, and then I did a master's in creative writing up in Edinburgh, which is where I still live. I then, yeah, as you said, I've had some short fiction published, often with a kind of fairy tale slant, actually. So I think at the back of my mind, I was always heading towards the novel that I've written. And yeah, and I lived in Geneva for a couple of years, working for a small publishing company, where I edited and I ghost wrote other people's books, which was very good practice for writing my own. And then I started a little literary consultancy business called Invisible Ink, where I sort of did some more ghostwriting, some more editing, some more mentoring, and all the while I was sort of working on this novel in the background. So it's finally emerged. Yeah, so it's a kind of, it's been a long time coming, and I've done some various bits and bobs, but I feel that all of it was a way of working my way towards this book.
I think, like in most creative fields of creative work, when people say a new talent has burst onto the scene, that's sort of a little underplaying the hard work that goes into it.
Yeah.
So you begin your lovely novel, The Lost Storyteller, with a quote from The Wizard of Oz. Now, so tell us a little bit about that connection and the blurring of truth and make-believe in The Lost Storyteller.
No one's asked me about the Wizard of Oz, actually. That's another great question. Yeah, so it's the quote. Well, I'll just quickly, hold on, let me just quickly get it so it's in context. So this is everyone knows the Wizard of Oz, don't they? But this is the part where Dorothy kind of realizes that he's not Oz, the great and powerful, and he says, "I have been making believe." "Making believe," cried Dorothy. "Are you not a great wizard?" "Not a bit of it, my dear. I'm just a common man." And I love, that's, without giving too much of the book away, that sort of really reflects one of the central kind of ideas of the novel. And I love The Wizard of Oz. It's such a weird story. I mean, the film is pretty weird, but the book is, if anything, even weirder. But it's, I think, that central idea that it's called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. It's about this man who turns out to be a complete phony. I think that's such a kind of wonderful idea to kind of base a children's book around, and not typical. And I just think that yeah, I really wanted, it's really hard for me to speak about it without giving too much of my book away.
Well, you mustn't do that.
But yeah, it's a wonderful story. It's so iconic, you know, the yellow brick road, the Emerald City. I mean, you can see that I've got a kind of emeraldy cover here. So it actually, you know, from the very start, my novel was a kind of, I don't want to say retelling or reimagining, because it's very loose, the way that I use The Wizard of Oz. You sort of don't need to remember The Wizard of Oz in any detail, but there are nods to it, and that's been that way from the start.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. Yes, I mean, Rebecca, our key protagonist, our heroine in the novel, I mean, like Dorothy, but as you say, I mean, you would not necessarily make that connection, except that you made it for us at the outset of the book. Does meet a really interesting array of characters in the quest for Leo, her dad, and the 7 fairy tales that you have created weave through the story. So they both hide and reveal information, I think, which is essential to her search. And I was just interested to know what sort of came first: the fairy tales, the characters, the storyline?
The main narrative, the quest for the father story, came first, and for a long time the fairy tales weren't in it, and I tried to write. It started actually as my master's dissertation, which was back in 2008. So that's how, I mean, I have not been working on this book all that time solidly, but you know, that's when the kind of the first idea came about. I wanted to write a story about focused on a father and daughter's relationship, because I sort of felt like people don't write about that anymore. It's a relationship that comes up a lot in fairy tales first and foremost, but also, you know, Shakespeare and myths, and even up to sort of 19th century literature. But it's rare to find a book that focuses on it now, in modern literature. So I had this sort of idea that I wanted to explore that, and I wrote sort of about 3 drafts of this in retrospect, very dry, very boring story, that was terribly well-meaning, but just not fun. And I ended up giving up on it. I thought, I can't do this. I went and wrote lots of short fiction, as I've mentioned, which often had fairy tales in them. I mean, it's quite obvious in retrospect what I should have done. I don't know why I didn't sort of work it out earlier. But yeah, I think once I got a bit of distance on my father-daughter story, I was doing a bit of traveling actually in New Zealand, and I had this kind of light bulb moment where I thought, I need to put fairy tales in it. And suddenly it became sort of, it started to take shape, and I think putting fairy tales in it also almost gave me permission to play a bit more with other aspects of the story. So I added the journalist character, who's quite central to the story, and I added the children's TV show that I mentioned earlier, and I started to kind of play with the narrative a bit more. And yeah, and suddenly it became a book that I would want to read, rather than this rather sort of dry novel that I started out writing.
I guess that sometimes when you get a storyline down as a writer, and then you hit that bit of a brick wall, as you did, going away and forgetting about it gives your subconscious the freedom to, as you say, have a light bulb moment. Handy in New Zealand, I hope you had a pen and paper handy. I'm sure you always do. So.
I did. I did. I think it was the scenery as well. You know, I remember being on a bus and we were driving through all this sort of stunning Lord of the Rings type scenery. So yeah, maybe it's quite a long way to go to solve your plot problems. But yeah, New Zealand was very inspirational.
I really enjoyed the 7 tales that weave throughout the book, and I felt that you enjoyed writing them. You know, they felt like they'd given you pleasure, and I think it's quite a feat to create something like that sort of resonates with the being of fairy tales, because fairy tales can be macabre, they can be quite misogynist, they're quite scary things, and so to create something like that harmonizes with your, if you like, real-time narrative, and still delivers a punch and meaningfully progresses the story, I'm guessing that may have been quite a difficult task to make that work.
Do you know what it was? I mean, yes, you're right, and I'm glad that you didn't say that before I'd written them. But it was the kind of for me it was the easiest part of the book, the fairy tales. I think, as you said, they did bring me so much joy, and I was so sort of happy that I'd sort of figured out how to tell this story, because the fairy tales do kind of reveal, as I said at the start, the truth, really, the truth in the make-believe. And so they really were a joy to write, and I'd sort of done my training, because I'd studied fairy tales and I'd read lots of fairy tales and I'd rewritten fairy tales. So yeah, I mean, it's, without giving too much away, they do kind of possibly tell us quite a lot about this absent father's life. So really what I had to do was kind of translate his life into fairy tale, into these, and it worked, you know, it fell into the 7 tales, and I had all these ideas that kind of just came out. Yeah, and I think in writing, that's when, you know, you're kind of onto a good thing, when it's not easy. Writing's never easy, but it's flowing, and that's what happened with the 7 tales.
It absolutely does work, and I think what's so enjoyable as far as a reader is concerned is that it just adds another and slightly unexpected dimension, which keeps you wanting to read on. I mean, I read very quickly, not because I was keen to get it over and done with, although in a sense, you know, I wanted to keep discovering along with Rebecca, and that's very clever. So thinking about all your fairy tale reading, and I assume, although it may not be the case, that you were taken up with fairy tales as a child, do you have a favorite fairy tale?
Oh, do you know what, a fairy tale I always return to is Sleeping Beauty, and I think I'd quite like to write something about it, because I love, not really for the main bit, but I love the idea of that forest springing up, this kind of spell that the whole kingdom is under for 100 years, and this forest that springs up, or this, you know, through the thorns, and like there's a story in that. Like, what happens? This is something I'd like to explore in the future. What happens in that forest? So, and I've sort of written various things about, in short fiction, about Sleeping Beauty, and I just feel there's a lot to mine in that fairy tale. And, you know, I mean, Disney already did Maleficent, which was so interesting as well. You know, there's just a lot of sort of motifs and angles of that. But no, I mean, I love them all, and I love retellings as well. There's a great author called Amy Bender who's written some amazing fairy tale retellings, and obviously Angela Carter is the one that everybody knows, and she's done some wonderful reimaginings of fairy tales. I could talk about fairy tale. I won't go on, but yeah, I could talk about fairy tales.
Yeah, I think we should make it clear for those who haven't read Amanda's lovely novel, The Lost Storyteller. Fairy tales are a part of the story, but they're certainly not the drive. They're not the only thing. I mean, but they're an integral part of a really fabulous modern day tale, shall we say. And part of that actually is that you've of course, the key characters are well realized, but I often find when I read a novel that some of the sub characters or the bit players are less well realized and are just there to sort of move the plot on. But I think you've memorably realized many of those characters. From Rebecca's colleague Chris, I just love the image of his protruding teeth and dedication to hair gel, giving him the look of a damp rodent. I mean, you can't think of anyone. Well, he's slightly repugnant, isn't he? And then you've got the sort of catty has-been actor who crops up as well, and this terrifyingly intimidating auntie. And I just wonder, do you have a little notebook full of sub characters that you just sort of go and delve into every now and then, or do you have to spend a lot of time developing these minor characters?
I mean, this sounds pretty dry, but I think first and foremost, I come up with characters to kind of perform a function. So the kind of repugnant guy in the office. Oh, he's not, poor Chris. He's not that bad. But yeah, the loser in the office. He's there to kind of show us what Rebecca's real life is like. Her life before this quest begins is like. But so I think first and foremost, I come up with characters to perform these kind of plot functions, and the aunt and the actor you mentioned, and the agent later on are there to kind of give us information about the absent father. But then again, I think this allowing myself to have fun comes into it, and I've got a kind of rule now that I sort of came up with while I was writing this book, which is, if I don't like writing a character, then there's something wrong with them. Like, I want to have fun with a character, and often they can be quite, like, as you say, the aunt is quite intimidating, but I also really like her, and I think that I think her heart is in the right place, just deeply down. So I try and give all my characters a bit of heart, even if they're quite difficult, and a bit of spark and a bit of humor. But yeah, so first and foremost, they kind of provide these functions, and then I allow myself to kind of play with them.
Brilliant. Now, you grew up in Devon, and I think subsequently, as you've explained, moved to Edinburgh to do your master's. And both those locations feature in Storyteller, along with London and Kent, and obviously forest locations. So tell us a little bit about the importance of location to you in life and in your writing.
Well, I always knew I wanted the book to be to be partly set in Edinburgh, because I think it's just such a magical city. And again, without giving too much away, I think it works really well with the father's character, and the kind of the story. Yeah, it's really hard to talk about this without spoilers. But yeah, Edinburgh to me is such a sort of magical place, obviously such a performative place because of the festival. So the kind of Edinburgh that I present in the novel is a slightly heightened, it's set during the festival, but it's a slightly heightened version of, it does feel like magic is just around the corner. I hope it does. That's what I intended when I wrote the book. Devon, is where I grew up, and it's lovely. But so I think I kind of partly set it there because it's because it means a lot to me. It's the location of my childhood, setting of my childhood, but also it's it feels quite far away. I mean, you mentioned London as well, which is where I did my first degree, my undergraduate degree, which to me sometimes, I mean, I love London, but it sometimes feels a bit too big. So and I think Rebecca feels there's a lot of the middle portion is set in London, and she's quite intimidated by London, and the London I present in the novel is again a little bit heightened, but in a kind of, it's very cool, the London that Rebecca sort of visits, and the Devon that I present is very sort of rural, and small town. So I'm kind of exaggerating, I suppose, the locations a little bit, and using it to kind of, Rebecca goes from her safe world to this kind of much bigger world in London, and Edinburgh at some point features, and that's kind of magic as well. So it's so yeah, I think I'm exaggerating these places.
And I think again that works well. It's not it's just part of the heightened reality of the novel in some ways, and also her very vulnerable state of mind. Actually, I mean, Rebecca is quite vulnerable in some ways. Now, can I just remind our guests that Amanda will try and answer your questions, so please do pop any questions you have into the chat function, and they'll be forwarded to me, which and I'll ask Amanda those questions towards the end of our conversation. We'll carry on chatting just for another 5 minutes or so. I think we will run just a little bit over, but from the hour, but not too much. Now, obviously, we've just been talking about location, and obviously research is an essential part of any novel or writing project. And I just wondered what aspects of research sort of took up most of your headspace and most of your time, because you've got quite an array of job titles and journalism, archaeology, acting and theatre, historic TV productions. I feel like actually again you handle it very lightly, but there must have been quite a lot of time-consuming research here.
Yeah, there was. Actually, I must say that's another reason, I'm talking about all these heightened versions of settings that I know, but part of it is like, well, I'm going to write about Devon because I know Devon, and I'm going to write about Edinburgh because I know Edinburgh, and I'm quite careful not to kind of mention too many real places. If possible, I'll make up a pub or a bar or something, because I just don't want readers coming to me and saying like, oh, that's not where that place is, and like, oh, the stairs there are different to how it is in real life. So I if possible, I'll make something up. In terms of the other research, I mean, this is where having like lots of interesting friends is very useful. So I've got a friend who did some archaeology work, and she helped me with so Rebecca kind of used to want to be an archaeologist in the novel, and it's a dream that's kind of been shelved, and that possibly she starts to kind of think about again during the course of the story. So yeah, I had to kind of ask my friend about archaeology. I've got another friend who's worked a lot in youth theatre, and he was brilliant for giving me information about that, because that comes into it later. The fairy tales, as I suppose that's kind of what I did the most research on, but it wasn't kind of conscious research because I'd already sort of done it for my other work. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just talking to people, and it's stuff like, so Rebecca works in the surveyor's office at the beginning. It's stuff like that you're like, oh God, I don't know anything about surveyors.
I guess the internet is kind of every writer's best friend these days as well, at least for a starter.
Really is.
Yeah,
it really is. I think you can get bogged down in research as well. Like, I think I tend to just sort of write and then go back and research the bits I need to. Otherwise, you'll never actually start the book, really.
Yes. The Lost Storyteller is effectively a linear tale, but this wrestling with lost or withheld information, actually, a lot of the time, about the past, and trying to capture and recapture vague childhood memories, is also integral to the story. And I just wondered that in the actual writing process, how you manage the timelines of the characters and their plots, and specifically, I suppose, Rebecca, because she's the one who's juggling all of these rather weird threads, trying to pull them together to get a picture of her dad.
Just a lot of planning. Like, I'm a planner. Some people just write, and that's definitely not what I do. There was a very long, like, sort of, I don't know how many pages, but it was about 6,000 words worth of plan, sort of in chapters, and where the fairy tales. The hardest bit was working out where the fairy tales would go, and sort of what Rebecca would discover when, from, like, if it was from a tale, or if it was from a person, or if it was from a memory. Those were the kind of three strands I had to weave together. So yeah, I mean, it was just a lot of planning, really. And then once I had it, I knew I had to stick to this plan, because if I was writing and I suddenly thought, wait a minute, why doesn't she discover it? No, because that's gonna, make the whole card castle collapse. So yeah, it's a bit of a boring answer, but it was just sticking to the structure.
In a sense, it's a boring question, but I know that people are often interested in how writers, some writers write on cards and stick them all around there. Others have a great big planner. So it's interesting to hear a little bit about your process.
No, just a Word document, just a long Word document.
Now, I love this little teaser book
Yeah.
from the publisher, which has the first of the 7 tales in it. Tell us a little bit about that author-publisher relationship and how that's worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing. So my publisher is Hodder Studio. They're a new imprint of Hodder. And they, yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the fairy tales, and as you've said, there is a narrative, there is this kind of modern day quest, and then the fairy tales are in a sort of scattered in that. And I did think, a part of me, I'm fascinated by fairy tales, but a part of me thought, when when my agent sent it to publishers, that they would be like, 7 is too many, like maybe put 3 in, or maybe, just tone the fairy tales down. And it was kind of the opposite. They didn't want more tales, but they just wanted that to be a really big aspect of it, which was amazing. And I kind of knew when they started talking about it that they were the right, my editor especially was the right editor for me, and that I'd sort of really landed on my feet with Hodder Studio. And yeah, so they produced this beautiful booklet to go out with the advanced reading copies, the proofs. And I guess a big part of the kind of the promotion of the book has been the fairy tales. I mean, the cover is obviously reminiscent of a kind of fairy tale tome. And yeah, so and that's just been joyous to me, because that is the kind of, for me, that's the hook as well. And it's yeah, it's been, I mean, I have only good things to say about Hodder Studio. It's been really, really wonderful working with them. And it's a 2-book deal. So we're kind of thinking about the second one now, and that's really exciting as well.
Well, that's what I was going to come on to next. I was going to say to you, I think that you talked about trying to keep the whole house of cards standing. And I think you've done that really effectively throughout the novel. It holds together brilliantly. It's just a very engrossing read. It's a lovely read. And I wanted to ask, what's next for you? I know you have a 2-book deal. I'm assuming that we won't carry on with this character, but maybe we will. Who knows? Tell us, Amanda.
Oh no, I'm finished with Rebecca and Co now. I think I think that we're done with them, and I'm really happy with that, actually. So the next book, it won't contain fairy tales. So a lot of people are saying to me, like, will it contain fairy tales? And no, but it's kind of worrying me that people are saying this. But I mean, you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over, can you? So yeah, it's what can I say about it? I mean, I've done my 6,000 word plan, and I've started writing it now. But I had a baby last year, and a book baby, of course. So that sort of slowed down the writing a little bit. So the next one is going to be a ghost story and a love story, and there's going to be, instead of fairy tales, I'm going to be kind of playing with myths. There's a sort of historical mythical strand. So structure wise it will be similar, but you know, the tone and the story and the characters and everything will be different. So I hope that if you like the first one, you're going to enjoy the second one, but it's kind of sufficiently different.
Well, that certainly gives us something to look forward to, Amanda. Thank you. We have got a few questions. So if you're happy with that, I'll run you through them. Here we go. So, Christine Chapman, they say, I liked Ellis. Is he someone you know?
Ellis is the journalist who accompanies Rebecca on her quest. He, at the beginning, I just feel I should explain this to everybody. At the beginning, she's quite annoyed with him, and she becomes less annoyed and more intrigued by him as the book goes on. A bit of romantic tension there. Ellis is not based on anyone I know, unfortunately.
But he is very charming. I have to agree.
Yeah, I think actually I've got actually a female journalist friend who's slightly Ellis-like, and another, yeah, no, but I mean, I don't really base characters on real people. So no, I just thought that in a way I think I created him because he's sort of the third. I mean, Rebecca and Leo are the main characters, really. Leo, the father, and I guess he's the third main character. And in a way, I kind of created him to complement both of them. So that's probably where he came from. Sorry.
Now, Barbara Jean says, can you describe? You'll have to do this quite brief, but can you describe your writing day? What helps you to concentrate? Are you a music girl, Amanda, or are you a silence girl?
That's so hard because I'm only just kind of figuring out what my writing day is again after maternity leave. It's really just sort of like propping myself up on the sofa, coffee, definitely. No, well, actually the next book is set, the sea is very important. So I've actually had I've got some kind of white noise going on in the background while I've been writing that, but no music really. No, it's quite boring. I set a timer, like an hour to write, and then I'm allowed to like go on Twitter and you know, check my phone and stuff. So no, it's quite boring. It's just getting on with it, putting my head down and getting on with it, really.
What do they say? Writers write, and so that's what you're trying to make yourself do.
Yes, definitely.
Colin says, as a debut novelist, I guess this would actually be a question for any writer. How did you cope with the editing process? Did you have to kill any of your darlings?
Do you know, I was lucky. As I said, I thought they cut fairy tales. I thought they would do all sorts of things to it, but they didn't. I mean, it's not massively different to what it was. You know, when I submitted it, I had to cut words, but then actually I had to put words in as well. And the words I had to put in were kind of more about Rebecca reflecting on the fairy tales and kind of the sort of, you know, it's the main narrative is there isn't any actual magic in it, but there's sort of hints of the joy of the imagination and stuff. And I had to put that in, but that was kind of what I wanted to put in the first place. So yeah, the editorial process was great. They just kind of they just polished the ideas that I'd already sort of that I'd already started, I suppose. So no.
So there were advantages of having worked on your novel since 2008.
I think so.
You'd obviously perfected it by then.
I mean, yeah, some might say that I had worked on it too much and for too long. But yeah, I was really fortunate that you know, both my agent and my editor felt like it was in good shape. I mean, obviously I did have to kind of tidy it up, but no kind of major cuts or dead darlings, no.
There are two more questions, and I think quite like to ask them, so I hope people will bear with us, and then we'll do our final farewells. Jenny asks, what are your top tips for a young budding author?
Oh, read, just keep reading, and don't just read kind of within your comfort zone, because actually a lot of, I talked earlier a little bit about when I sort of suddenly worked out how to write this book, and I didn't sort of really go into it, but a lot of it was also reading other people's work and saying, okay, they're doing this, so I can, he's done this with stories within stories, so I can do that. And so I think it's so inspirational to kind of read widely, and you never know kind of what you're going to pick out from other people's work. I mean, that's a really obvious answer. The other one is again, quite obvious, but join a writers group or find some writing friends and exchange your work. Because I think the more you keep it to yourself, the more kind of you're just going to get yourself in a mess and not be able to get out of it. I'm very fortunate to have lots of lovely writer friends, and being able to talk through ideas and being able to share manuscripts with them is so useful. So I think those are my two top tips.
Thank you. And Neve Anderson says, you've tried short stories, a novel, and fairy tales. Yeah. Have you ever written poetry, or would you like to?
That's a very good question. Yes, I would really love to write poetry. I don't read enough of it, so I need to take my own advice actually before I start, because I don't read enough of it. Funnily enough, I never really felt the kind of desire to write it before, until I had my baby last year, and something about that experience. It was quite difficult in many ways because of the pandemic, but also I just felt like I had so many feelings, like mostly wonderful feelings, also scary feelings, and I think that's where poetry is really good. And some, all those feelings and ideas that I had, I just didn't feel would fit into a novel or a short story. So I've got lots of notes that maybe one day I'll turn into poetry, but not until I've read more, not until I've taken my own advice, because I'm not, I've studied poetry, but not for a long time.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda, for that insight, both into The Lost Storyteller, your current book, and also a little taster of what's to come. I think we'd be very happy for you to carry on writing novels right now, although dabble in poetry in due course. Just a reminder that Amanda's book is available at all good bookshops and here in Berwick at Greaves. And really all that remains for me is to thank all of our contributors, Michael, Mike and Colin, and of course Amanda herself. And most of all, thanks to you, our patrons, sponsors and festival friends, for coming along tonight and for your ongoing support of our friendly festival in a walled town. I do hope that you'll all agree that it really is a super programme that Mike and the team have put together, and that we've really got something very special to look forward to in this autumn. Please do share our programme with your friends and families. I mean, the more people we get along, the better it is. As has already been said, early bird bookings or reservations for patrons for the online events go live towards the end of August, I think the 30th of August, and then become open to all on the 1st of September. For the live events at the Maltings, keep an eye on the Maltings website, but we again will be communicating with you when they go live. So really that's it, folks. We'll see you in October, if not before. Thank you again to Amanda. Thank you everyone, and good night.